Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Jan Sewing Solutions. Now this is a problem that one of the members has had, Rifna. She sent me a sketch of the panels that she'd done. Now I've addressed this issue lots and lots of times, but I'm just going to briefly go through some of the problems that she faced, or some of the points that she made on her sketch. Okay, so when you're cutting the khallis out, it's entirely up to you how many panels you want to do, and depending on the size that you're making and the size of the panels you cut, you can keep on adding. So the smaller you cut your panel, the more panels you'll add to make the bigger width of the dress. So if she was wanted to make 24 panels, and depending on what space you're fitting the 24 panels in. So if your panel was each 1 inch, you wanted to make a waistline of say 28, then you've got 14 pieces of 1 inch, making half the waist width. Okay, and you'll need the seam allowance. So but if you were using 12 pieces, then what you would need to do is divide the waist size between those pieces, the 12 panels. So it'll be 12 divided by half of your waistline. Yeah. So if the waistline is 32, you'll be dividing the 12 between the 32, and that's what each of your khallis will be. The other thing to bear in mind is you are sewing on fairly fine materials, and if you're sewing on something like chiffon, then you would need to leave enough of a seam allowance to work with, because chiffon frays a lot, so you need to leave slightly bit more. Simba, will you get down? Come on. She wants, you know what, she like knows that this attention, right? So if you're working on, say, like net doesn't fray, and you don't need to leave that much of a seam allowance on a net. If you're working on a chiffon, you need more of a seam allowance, because by the time you've got to sewing it, it would already have frayed a little bit. So you've got to bear that in mind. But then if you've got the fabric, when you're buying the fabric, always buy more fabric than you need, so that you can take an additional 1 or 2 khallis out extra. When you cut out an extra khalli, just to be on the safe side. If you don't need to add them, that's fine. But if you do need to add them, the last thing you want to do is be running around for fabric. Okay. The other thing you want to bear in mind is that if you do run short, then one of the things that you can do is... Okay, let's just quickly get a dress that's made up. If you do run short, you can always compromise by adding a piece on the... Normally the tightness generally happens around the bust area, so you can always add a khalli to extend the bust line. Okay, waist is generally fine. On a lot of the time, people tend to overcut over wide, and that's one of the problems that a lot of the members have. So I'm just gonna... That was just a brief description, but when you're cutting the panels, this is all optional, how wide you want to make the bottom, each one of the panels. Now we're going to cut one panel, and we're going to make this 12 and a half inches, maybe, well, roughly about 13 inches. By the time we've cut into this, I want it 12 inches wide at the bottom. So it's all a full line of 7 inches from here, 7 inches from here, and you would get it very, very symmetric if you were cutting this away and taking the excess, but then you would be wasting a lot of fabric, and the last thing we want to do is waste away the fabric. So what we do is we cut these alternative. So one we cut from this side, one we cut from that side, and that sometimes means that when you're turning this around and laying it out, you don't get it symmetric, and that's one of the areas where you can end up getting problems. So once this is 7 inches from there, 7 inches from there, it's all halved out. We're going to be cutting symmetric on both the sides. The first measurement that we've taken is from the shoulders to the tip of the bust, and just basically just mark just mark that out. This is our first piece that we're cutting out. Then from the tip of the bust, you want it to your sort of hip point, just above your hip point, depending on how big, you know, if you've got a slight bulging belly, then you would leave it a little bit higher. But if you've got a nice long waist, then you would take it a little bit lower up to the point of the hip. Here we're going to go down 6 inches. Okay, and then we're going to be going inwards. And this is just our rough sketch, so it doesn't matter if we've got marks on this. But here, what we're going to do is just do about 1.5 inches. And again, we're going to do 1.5 inches here. And this is just a straight line between here. And then this point, we take it right up to the hemline and we do a straight line. Now, with yours, Rifna, the problem that you had was you went out. So this cut wasn't straight, it was like ballooned. And what you're going to have is, when it's ballooned, when you sew, it'd be puffed out from here. And you want this fall to fall absolutely evenly going all the way down. Okay, this is generally slightly wider on the bust area. If you're very heavily busted, what I would recommend is slightly going out, just to sort of give your bust that little bit of, you know, but you don't want to increase this a lot, very marginal, because you're going to be attaching a lot of the khallis, and by the time you've given a little bit allowance to each one, it end up incorporating, you know, into the what you want. You can actually even leave it same, and you can actually just, you know, by sewing, just take it out a little bit more and a little bit more in on the waist. So generally what we do is we cut this all the same, and when we're sewing on the waist point, we take it in a little bit more. Generally we know whereabouts our waistline is, and you can always mark the khalli, just to make sure that where your waistline is falling. So that basically is it, and I'll cut this out and then I'll go open it up and I'll show you exactly what we've done.
So this is the middle one, or this is the side one?
No, this is these are all your khallis,
Right.
except for the outer side ones. Okay, so when this is opened, right now this is opened, and if you look at it, this looks quite wide. Now if you feel that this is wide, and this, you know, because the overall width of this khalli is very wide. Let's perfect it out from here. Decide now what you want to do, how many inches you want it out. Okay, so if we want the khallis left at an inch each, you know, each of the khallis are only going to be left 1 inch, then what we can do is mark this off at 2, meaning that we're going to be taking that excess away, and we can actually go marking it out from the one side all the way down. Take we measure how many we've taken off. Just one at a time. This colour is the same. I can't see on this one.
I wonder where the one's gone.
I don't know where it's fallen. Well, you know what I'm trying to do. We're keeping the equal distance all the way going down, and we're going to take some part of this away, because this is too wide for what I want. Now there is, all we're doing is creating a template. So until you can mess around with it as much as you want, until you get the perfect template that you want, you know, the first piece, because we're not wasting the fabric. You can do this on any spare fabric. Okay. Now there is another problem here. This is too long as well. Okay, so you've got to decide just how long. I got a mannequin here. I'm just going to bring one of them mannequins. Not the person standing there, you see. So we'll use this to demonstrate. So you imagine this to be the person that you're cutting this for. Right. That waistline seems right. Okay. But it's a little bit long at the top. So what we're going to do is just take a little bit off. I've done this a little bit too long. Can I just measure that on you? I think that seems right. But it's too long.
That's fine, we'll cut it from the bottom.
Yeah. The other thing that you want is you need to make sure it's easy to cut it at this time than it is to cut it later. You don't want to be cutting all your kalyans this long and then trying to even them out. Yeah. So you want to make sure that you cut this to the right size. Now, if you want to keep it this length, then what I would suggest to you is to fold that over and to pin it. And then sometimes you can use it as longer and sometimes you can use it as shorter, depending on the size you want.
That's fine.
Yeah. So depending on how big a border you want to add to your suit as well. So this is just the rough sketch of one khalli. And this you can, if you wanted to add less khallis, you would just make this slightly bigger.
Wider, yeah.
Yeah, wider. At the bottom it'll be fine because this is quite adequate size. If you wanted a smaller looking khalli even at the bottom, then you can decrease them all the way down.
Yeah.
That's basically, you can keep on putting the, you can make this into 36 khalliyan, you can make them smaller. You can make them into 12 khallis, you can make them slightly bigger. So it's all optional. That's your main one. Now the other one, which I would want to show, is cutting the side one. Now you can actually add all just as panels, and you don't have to add the side ones. This is all, again, is for your own preference and saving fabric and making it easier. Because generally what happens when you've got the side khalli, you can't really tell. And you can get the shape of the kameez just based on the cutting of this piece. We're going to use the same one to cut this, but the thing that we've got to remember is when you're cutting the panels and you're putting this on top of the fabric, you've got to make sure that this is actually sitting on the grain.
Right.
Whether the grain is running that way, here for the fabric, saving of the fabric, we're cutting it this way. But remember not to put it level with the fabric. It's got to sit straight on the grain. That's the only way you'll get a good fall, otherwise you will have problems. So even the side panel, we want it cut exactly the same as our existing one, except that when it comes to the bust point, we're going to make this wider because this is where we're going to cut the armhole. Again, we're just using the initial one. The only difference is that we've incorporated the slight bit, rather than adding pieces there, we've made this larger. Okay, so now the biggest problem on an annarkhalli is actually the stitching.
Why?
I'll just explain that. Let me just cut this and then I'll explain where your problems arise. It depends on the machinist to machinist, but so when it comes to stitching, you start at the top and you work downwards. Okay, you've got one fabric underneath, one on top, and you're stitching down and you're stitching down, and the machine, what it does is it pushes and it pushes and pushes, and by the time you've come to the bottom, you've got that. One fabric is more and one fabric is less. Then you've got the other one. Again, you've put this one underneath and you put this one on top, and you've gone down and you've gone down and you've gone down, and when you've got to the bottom, what's happened is, again, you've got this one more and that one less. Then you get the scissor and you think you're evening them out. In actual fact, what you've done is, if you were to reopen all those and if you put them down again, you'll have up and down. When you hold it straight, you'll have one piece flopping down, one piece hanging up. You've ruined the hanging. Okay. So what you've got to do is, when it comes to sewing, you're stitching down, you've got to, first of all, you've got to make sure that if that piece is coming out that much more on that side, okay, the next piece on that side, make sure that you leave that much of a space, and you put that underneath your machine and you work upwards. And if you've got, because what's happening is the machine is actually pushing on the fabric. And by the time you've reached the end, if you've no idea how to handle fabrics, guaranteed that's what will happen to you. This is due to years and years of experience that you will eliminate that, or your fabric knowledge. If you know how to handle your machine, how to handle your fabric, you will not have that. You will incorporate.
Could you not pull the bottom one slightly?
Yeah, that's what I mean. You've got to judge the fabric. So when you're judging the fabric, but you see this one hasn't been straightened off as well.
Yeah.
So you have got that, those sides are slightly more than these sides.
Yeah.
So, if these pieces are joined, it does need to be slightly rounded off as well. I haven't rounded it off. So you have got, when you've even got these all joined up, that's how they're going to be. And you want them rounded off actually, because otherwise the full care is not a round circle. But yes, you've got to judge your fabric, and you've got to make sure. I mean, earlier on I was doing a lesson with the girls, and we were talking about, I don't know what it was that we were trying to address, but where the problem arises that one fabric gets pushed and becomes more and the other fabric is left less. But you've got to judge the fabric, and you've got to make sure that the give, you incorporate it into the giving while you're sewing.
Right, okay.
So if you pin it at the bottom and make sure that that's evened out, and you've got little bits of uneven, that you can just give on the fabric, then you won't have that problem.
That's fine.
Yeah. So that's just two of your khallis. Do you have problems with anything else?
That's fine. Thank
Are
you.
you alright with your sleeve?
You might as well just cut the sleeve.
That's one of the other problems that a lot of the members have is with sleeves and armhole cutting. I'll go back to the armhole cutting. You know what? I'll just take a small pause there, because I think I'll do this with